China wants to push India into a war and then it will crush India. But how do you address this Indian apprehension, which is very real, which is very widespread?
Sometimes some truths are very painful. The Chinese are very, very concerned about a war. But they're very concerned about a war with the United States. Very concerned. Right. Because the United States is clearly trying to push China down. I mean, that's obvious, for obvious reasons.
什么叫自作多情的最高境界？印度主持人可以说是把他们国内那种被迫害妄想症演绎到了极致。他满脸严肃地向马凯说控诉中国是不是想摧毁我们印度，结果马凯说一点面子都没给，直接甩过去一句大实话：别想太多了，中国人对你们根本不感兴趣，人家的眼里只有美国。这记无形的耳光，可以说是把印度那颗脆弱又敏感的自尊心给扇得粉碎。印度人到底有多纠结？面对印度的这种情绪化，这位亚洲最顶尖的智囊又是如何像教训小学生一样，给他们上一堂残酷的地缘政治课？端好咖啡，咱们看大戏。
Whole world comments. When it comes to China, everybody's quiet.
Well, I think, as you know, India was very upset when Prime Minister Trudeau yesterday made some comments
about the farmer protest.
Yeah. And I think we in Asia are wiser than the West is. And, just to put in a big historical context, I've been a student of the West for a long time. The West has lost its political domination. It has lost its economic domination. It only now has intellectual domination. And it preserves its intellectual domination by lecturing the whole world on human rights issues, when the West, as you know, is completely hypocritical on human rights issues. I'll give you a simple example. The European countries will condemn any country that carries out torture, right? If India carries out waterboarding, the European countries will be the first to insist that India stops waterboarding. But when the United States was the first major developed country to reintroduce torture, the European countries kept absolutely quiet. But whenever any government tries to criticize any country on human rights, I say they've got double standards, because they will only criticize their adversaries and not...
In perspective, Pakistan now is seen almost as a kind of vassal state of China. And so when these border tensions, in fact, erupted, one of the things that the Indian military had to war game was for a possible two-front conflict. And it's always war gamed for that. But there's a kind of, Pakistan is sort of being seen as a continuum of China. How do you see that relationship? Obviously, for China, it's all about self-interest. For any nation, its choices are about self-interest. There, I agree with you. But from an Indian perspective, we're looking at this. We're looking at Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. We're looking at the sort of, a one road project. And we're going, Pakistan is just like now an addendum, almost an addendum to China.
Well, in international affairs, I always believe that the biggest problem is when you get emotional, right? Mm-hmm. And if Pakistan was a complete vassal state of China, why does it go to the IMF when it needs assistance, right? Mm-hmm. It's a vassal state of China. It should say, to hell with the IMF, to hell with all that. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And so I would say that, it's a big mistake to use labels, okay? Yeah. And it's also important to ask yourself, again, if you don't mind me being very frank, so why does India always focus on problems of the past, on differences, and not focus on what can be done to learn lessons from others and learn to find a better way? There are better ways.
How do you see, for example, the Pakistan-China equation?
Well, I think, geopolitics, as I told you earlier, where just as the United States chose the world's largest communist country under Mao Zedong as a partner, countries don't care what your internal system is about. If it suits their geopolitical interests, they will work with the country. And right now, there's a convergence of geopolitical interests within Pakistan and China. So that's what happens. So, and just as there is, by the way, a convergence of geopolitical interests within India and United States today. That's what's happening also. And that is not driven by the fact that they like each other or believe in each other. It's about geopolitical interests. China and Vietnam are far greater adversaries. And look at the trade between Vietnam and China today. It's amazing. So, and at the end of the day, why is Vietnam doing this? Let me tell you what Vietnam is doing this. Vietnam is trading heavily with China, not because the Vietnamese love China. They are using China to make themselves strong in the same way that China used the United States to make itself strong. So you use your adversary to make yourself stronger. Now that's the best game of geopolitics you can play.
Okay, I have some questions for you on our live stream that I want to actually just pick up one by one. First is that Abhishek Singh says the onus of resolving the differences between India and China at the moment should be on China. Why blame India?
I'm sorry. I can only help you by being very frank. I've studied geopolitics for 50 years. I don't know of any geopolitical dispute where one side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong. So as you know, in the case of China and India, the border dispute, you also know that 3 times the Chinese leaders, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, proposed to India, we will never be able to figure this all out, this border dispute. Why not just accept the line as it is and settle as it is? And as you know, 3 times India turned China down. That's also a fact. And frankly, I think it was unwise to turn down that offer. It was very unwise because that would have settled the matter. And as you know, China has settled its border disputes with Russia, with Vietnam, with Mongolia, with everybody else. It's settled. So it is possible to do a deal. And I think it's important, therefore, to figure out at the end of the day, if you want to succeed, you got to figure out what are my bigger, more fundamental interests. And this is a marathon race between China and India. It's a marathon race. We will know the winner 100 years from now. And the marathon race will be determined by who has the stronger economic legs.
We have a question on our live stream from Sanjay who says, no, I don't agree. The free trade agreement between any country and China can only benefit China because trade with China is a one-way street.
Okay. By the way, trade can never be one way.
I think the point is that it's not a level.
Excuse me. You know something? Yeah. If it is all one way, you know what's going to happen? Nobody, if others don't benefit from trading with China, then they won't have money to buy goods from China, to buy goods from China. And by the way, if you look at Southeast Asia again, it's amazing that the Southeast Asian economies, which were behind China in so many ways, many of them have surplus with China. And by the way, it is possible to negotiate a free trade deal with China where China will give you unilateral concessions temporarily to enable you to catch up in the competition. And China was very generous to Southeast Asia in giving what they call an early harvest in that.
So I want to give you a sense of how a lot of Indians feel, and that's why I'm picking up an emotional question, even though you spend a lot of time of the conversation saying the one thing you should never be in geopolitics is emotional. But this reflects how many Indians are thinking and feeling today. Nandita Ghosh on our stream says, China wants to push India into a war and then it will crush India. There is a sense, what you call the marathon competition on between India and China. There is a sense that there's room for only one winner here. Right. And that is why the kind of sort of coexistence that you're speaking about, even though there are not the kind of historical conflicts that India has with Pakistan, with China. And, I remember Modi used to say before this border conflict that not one shot has been fired at these borders for decades. That unfortunately now doesn't apply. We're actually seeing a kind of, we've seen a military conflict. But how do you address this Indian apprehension, which is very real, which is very widespread, that now the narrative is it's not Pakistan, it's China that's the real adversary. It's China that has blocked, for example, UN sanctions against terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jamaat-e-Dawa. You've served as the president of the UN Security Council. You know what these concerns are about. So just address that concern that China does not even stand with India on the issue of terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the question from Nandita Ghosh that China wants to push India into a war and then it can try to crush India.
Yes.
Sometimes some truths are very painful. The Chinese are very, very concerned about a war. But they're very concerned about a war with the United States. Very concerned. Right. Because the United States is clearly trying to push China down. I mean, that's obvious, for obvious reasons. And if you go to Beijing, and of course, I've been there a few times, and you mention India, they look very puzzled. Oh, really? They're concerned about us? Why? China, I was amazed at the indifference of the Chinese to India. Because for them, their number one threat, and by the way, there'll be a monumental struggle between US and China in the next 20 years. The Chinese have only one obsession. They got to survive this US onslaught against China, which is coming, which is, as I say, I've documented in my book, Has China Won? And they are focused on that. And so as a result of that, that creates opportunities for others. So it creates opportunities for Southeast Asia. Because in Southeast Asia, because China doesn't want Southeast Asia to become an anti-Chinese lake, the Chinese are doing their best to build win-win economic partnership with Southeast Asia. And I can guarantee you this, that if you can sit down and have a rational dialogue, where you've got to push aside your emotions for a while, you'll find that China will be very happy to work out a win-win arrangement with India too, for the same reason that they want to focus on the United States. And you're right to point out the major trade deficit between US and within China and India. You're absolutely right. But there are ways and means of dealing with trade deficits. And, for example, when the United States was very worried about the major trade deficit with the Japanese, as you know, the United States and Japan had negotiations, and the Japanese agreed to what is called VERs, voluntary export restraints. So, that what I'm saying to you is there's no problem in the world is new. Every problem has got a precedent. And so you can find ways and means of dealing with it, and then take advantage of the larger market.
And there are questions on that, and I'll come to that. But if the Chinese are indeed indifferent to India, how do you explain this mass military buildup at the border with India? Well, why block sanctions against terror groups like the JUD and the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar?
But as you know, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Exhibit A, Mandela. Mandela was called a terrorist by United States, as you know. But on the cases you mentioned, yes, it's unwise of China to block the designation of terrorist group. I agree with you there.
Talking about technology, how do you see the Indian move to block a whole host of Chinese apps?
Oh, I would say that's peanuts. Peanuts.
Why?
Life is much bigger than this TikTok, PUBG. And this is an example of being petty. It's peanuts. The Chinese don't care. The Chinese, remember, from the Chinese point of view, there is a much bigger game. And you can ban TikTok, you can do all that. It doesn't hurt China at all. No, zero hurt at all. But the important thing to ask, what if I was an Indian? I would ask a very simple question. My number one competitor today is China.
Yeah.
What is China doing right? What is China doing wrong? What is India doing right? What is India doing wrong? And then calculate. And then I can tell you, let me come onto your program 10 years from now.
10 years. Okay.
10 years from now.
Long.
And I'll tell you the world, and
game.
I'll tell you what the world will be. 10 years from now, United States will be number 2. China will be number 1. And you know what? China and the United States will come to some accommodation. 10 years from now.
What will happen to China? And China and India? Where will China and India be 10 years from now in this equation, in your opinion?
It all depends on how cunning India is. It all depends on how you play the game. Right. You see, right now, you have a window of opportunity because China is still number 2. It's much easier to negotiate with the number 2, not with the number 1. But you want to wait 10 years? Then when you negotiate with the number 1, it's much harder. So you got to be very brutal about these things, and stop being so emotional. I mean that's a fundamental problem with the way Indians look at the world. And by the way, I'm not every other country looking at this whole thing is sort of wondering why are the Indians so can't set aside one thing and say, okay, let's focus on the big picture. The big picture is the economic game. Right. And are you winning the economic game or are you losing the economic game?
印度果然一股子的酸楚味。在这场对话里，马凯说完全是一个清醒的成年人，在试图叫醒一个被情绪裹挟的地缘巨婴。大家细品那位印度主持人的问题：巴基斯坦是附庸，中国包庇恐怖分子，中国想摧毁我们。他满脑子都是这些阴谋论和是非对错。而马凯硕是怎么回答的？他通篇都在谈一个词：利益。他给印度人举了越南的例子。越南在历史上跟中国打过仗，有旧怨，但现在呢？越南跟中国做着极其庞大的生意。马凯硕一针见血，你以为越南是因为喜欢中国才这么做吗？他们是在利用中国壮大自己。这就是国家之间最成熟、最冷酷的生存法则。没有永远的朋友，更没有永远的意气之争。但印度人显然没听懂，他们还在那里沾沾自喜地问：你看我们封禁了中国的 app， 是不是很厉害？马凯硕那句回答真的是字字诛心，那不足挂齿，那是小气的表现。中国人根本不在乎，这也根本伤害不了中国。这就是弱者和强者的思维差异。印度人总觉得我们在边境上跟你耗着，我们在手机上封杀你几个软件，我就能在心理上赢你一局，我就能跟你平起平坐了。可是就像马凯硕在视频最后抛出的那个灵魂拷问，大局是什么？大局是经济博弈。10年后，你看的是你的经济赢了还是输了？很简单，你封杀了 TikTok， 你的老百姓就能吃饱饭了吗？你的制造业就能追上中国了吗？你就能造出自己的隐形战机和高铁了吗？什么都没有改变。当中国集中所有的国力在科技和产业升级上跟美国进行生死时速的较量时，印度却在为了几个 App， 为了几片不毛之地的摩擦而自我高潮。马凯说的最后一句警告，其实是给印度留的最后一点体面。趁着现在中国还是世界第2，你们赶紧坐下来谈，还能要点筹码。等10年后中国成了第1，你再去谈，人家连多看你一眼的兴趣都没有了。大国博弈拼的永远是硬碰硬的经济仗和工业仗，把情绪当饭吃，把自嗨当胜利，注定会被真实的时代车轮无情地甩在身后。好了，今天茶水间的这场降温课就上到这里。你觉得印度能听得懂这句忠告吗？欢迎在评论区留下你清醒的预判。关注阿欣的茶水间，让我们在这个充满情绪的世界里保持最冷酷的理智。咱们下期见。